Hello everybody! In today's video, I will show you how I usually annotate the books I read. Though I've been reading since I was very young, annotating my books is something I just started last year. And though I am fairly new with book annotation, I discovered that the way I annotate my books depend on the things that I am looking for and the things that I want to get from the books. So this video is divided into two parts. The first part, I will show you the things I usually annotate, while the second part, I will show you the different ways in which I annotate. So there are times when I annotate books to further understand the plot or the characters. An example of that is the annotation I did for this book called A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain. Since the novel features characters from the legend of King Arthur, and since I started reading this without any prior knowledge about King Arthur, his knights, nor the Round Table, what I did was I looked for character lists and descriptions available on the internet. I wrote the character descriptions on sticky notes and stick everything on my book. That way, I'll have an idea as to the similarities and differences between the source material, which is the legend of King Arthur, and the plot and characters of Mark Twain's novels. Sometimes, I would annotate in order to understand the setting and the context of the novel. That is what I did for the book America's in the Heart by Carlos Bulosan. Since the story is set during the early 20th century US and the Philippines, I specifically looked for passages in the novel that describe the United States and the Philippines during this time period. By annotating these descriptions, I was able to identify the similarities and differences between the US and the Philippines. Also, I was able to identify the relationship between these two countries during the time when the Philippines was still a US colony. This made it easier for me to understand the experiences of the main character and relate it to the experiences of the first Filipino migrant workers in America. I was also able to relate the information on this novel on other books and articles I read related to this topic. When reading classic books like Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, the main challenge I encountered was comprehending the story. Since I am not a native English speaker, understanding Jane Austen's writing was my constant struggle. With this in mind, the annotation I did for this focused on making sure that I'll follow the story. First, I identified unfamiliar words and sometimes wrote its meanings on the book itself. Most of the time, though, I just identified the words and looked for its meaning on my dictionary without writing it directly on the book. Second, I also color coded the conversations just so I can easily follow the flow of the story. For this specific chapter, wherein there was an exchange between Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet, I color coded their exchanges by highlighting statements of Elizabeth in blue and Mr. Darcy's statements in gray. Through this, I was able to go back to their individual statements, digest what they were trying to say, and connect this chapter to their individual character development and the overall development of the story. Another thing I did with this particular novel, one which I also do when I read old classic books, is that I write my comments, reactions, or thoughts directly on my copy. That way, I'll be able to process what I just read without reading or rereading the chapters. This will also save me so much time because I have everything I need in the book. So those are the things that I usually look for when I am annotating. Now, I'll show you the different strategies I annotate depending on whether I want to keep the book or not. So I have books that I want to annotate but I know I won't be keeping for a long time. These are the ones that I might give to a friend or sell in the future. So I want to make sure that the book's condition will remain as good as possible. What I do with this is I write my thoughts, comments, or reactions on a sticky note. That way, by the time I'll sell or give the book to a friend, I won't struggle with removing my notes because I could just easily stick them or copy them on a separate notebook. The second strategy I do is for the books that I want to keep but I want to remain free from highlights and notes. I usually do this strategy on non-fiction books because I don't want to be distracted with the previous notes or highlights in case I want to reread them again. So what I do is instead of highlighting passages, I just use sticky tabs and place it on quotes and parts of the books that I like. I guess the only disadvantage of this strategy is that since I do this on books I bring whenever I go out, the sticky tabs get misplaced and as a result, I struggle with looking for those passages and quotes that I want to remember. The third strategy, this one I do when reading books I have no prior knowledge about, is the go with the flow strategy. In this annotation strategy, what I do is identify initial things to look for. Then, as I read the rest of the novel, I begin to annotate the themes I found or discovered. I did this strategy when reading Sense and Sensibility. Initially, I was just looking for funny moments and quotable passages, but as the novel progressed, I was able to include in my annotation instances or statements in the novel that showed relationship red flags and relationship green flags. So, this relationship green and red flags became the focal point of my annotation for this particular novel. The last strategy, which I usually use when reading chunky novels like The Brothers Karamazov or War and Peace, is probably the most complicated of the bunch. I use this strategy whenever I read long books that has many characters and espouse various themes. So for The Brothers Karamazov, what I did was first I looked for existing study guides online. The study guides identified themes, and I used this in my annotation process. So, for this particular novel, the study guide I found identified three major themes. So, what I did was to first write these themes on a sticky note, stick it on my copy of the book, and then assign a specific color for each of the themes. So, the study guide identified the following themes: humanity in the face of the poor and the downtrodden, psychology of the human mind, especially the mind of the criminal, and religious faith in the face of injustice and suffering in the world. So these were the themes I found, and I used those themes for annotation. But aside from those, I also annotated the main characters of the novel. The back summary of this particular edition described the main characters, so based on this description, what I did was to annotate instances, passages, or statements in the novel that reflects the character descriptions provided in the short summary. So in the short summary, Mitya was described as a sensualist, Ivan as the intellectual, Alyosha as the spiritual, and Smerdyakov as the mysterious. So what they did was to identify instances and color-coded those instances based on the assigned colors for each character. As for my thoughts, reactions, or comments, I wrote most of them on a sticky note. Sometimes, when there were passages I did not understand, I looked for explanations on the internet and wrote what I found on the sites. Usually, I write these explanations using a different color for easy identification. The reason why I wrote most of my comments on a separate sticky note is because the spaces on the sides of the pages are very small and cannot accommodate my writings. So I just decided to write everything on a separate sticky note. So that's it for this video. I hope you learned something, and I hope you can also apply these annotation strategies in your own reading journey. That's it for this video. Thank you very much, and see you on my next one. Bye!